their golden light spilling across white tablecloths and polished silver that shimmered like mirrors of power. The air was thick with expensive perfume and fear. Even laughter here sounded rehearsed, like it was waiting for permission to exist. In the corner booth, always the corner booth, sat Dante Moretti. 32 years old, sharp as a blade, dangerous as the silence that followed his name. His black suit fit him like armor. His cufflinks gleamed like warning signs. He didn't just occupy space. He ruled it. People spoke softer when he was near. Waiters breathed quieter, and the pianist never dared miss a note. Every Tuesday at 7:30, that booth was his. It had been for months, since the night he bought Valentino's owner a new life in Tuscany and took control of the place in exchange for silence. No one questioned it. No one wanted to. Dante's world was one of obedience disguised as respect. He ate in silence, spoke in fragments, and never smiled unless someone was about to regret something. Tonight was no different. His phone rested, face down beside his glass of wine, the screen lighting up every few seconds with messages from men who feared him more than the police. Antonio, the head waiter, approached with trembling hands and a bow, practiced so often it looked like muscle memory. "Your usual, sir." Dante didn't look up. He only nodded, eyes scanning the room with the instinct of a man who trusted no one. He saw everything. The nervous couples, the businessmen pretending to be important, the guards pretending to be guests. He noticed everyone except the waitress who had just pushed through the kitchen doors with 3 plates balanced perfectly on her arms. Ra Mitchell moved with quiet grace. She'd been at Valentino's for 8 months, long enough to know the rhythm of its fear. She didn't belong in this world of gold and deceit. She belonged in bright hospital halls with children's laughter echoing off white walls, not among criminals in suits. But nursing school wasn't cheap, and dreams didn't pay tuition. So she smiled when people snapped their fingers, said thank you when they ignored her, and counted tips like prayers. She'd heard about the man in the corner. Everyone had. The stories changed nightly. Some said he'd killed with his bare hands, others that he owned judges and mayors the way normal people owned pets. She didn't care. Dante Moretti was just another customer. But when she saw Antonio's pale face as he hurried toward the kitchen, she knew something was wrong. Dante's fork hit the table like a gunshot. The pianist stopped playing mid-chord. "This is unacceptable." His voice was low, but it cut through the air like glass. Antonio rushed to explain, but stumbled over his words. "The steak, sir. The chef prepared it medium rare as always." Dante's hand curled into a fist. "This is raw. Am I surrounded by incompetence?" People froze. Forks hovered in the air. One woman set her wine glass down so gently it barely made a sound. In the corner, a man coughed once and instantly regretted it. Sarah's eyes flicked toward the plate as Antonio lifted it. She could see it from where she stood. The meat was perfect. Seared, pink in the middle, exactly as it should be. This wasn't about food. This was about fear. About control. And something inside her, the part that refused to bow, snapped. Before she could think, she walked forward, her red apron stark against the golden light. Antonio's whisper followed her like a ghost. "Sarah, don't." But she didn't stop. She stopped beside the booth, the air around her electric with disbelief. Dante looked up, his dark eyes narrowing, curiosity flickering behind the fury. "Is there a problem, sir?" she asked, her voice steady, calm, the way you talk to someone holding a knife. "The problem," he said, "is that I asked for quality and got this." He gestured to the plate. She leaned slightly, not breaking his gaze. "The steak is cooked exactly as ordered. I saw it before it left the kitchen." For a heartbeat. Silence. Then he stood, tall, towering. His shadow swallowed her whole. "Are you telling me I'm wrong?" Every instinct screamed at her to step back. Every eye in the restaurant begged her to. But Sarah didn't move. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath didn't falter. She looked up at him, saw the sharpness in his jaw, the scar near his temple. the power that lived in his silence, and she decided he didn't scare her. "You don't own me." The words fell soft, almost gentle, but they struck like thunder. Forks clattered. Someone gasped. The pianist's hands hovered, trembling above the keys. Dante Moretti, the man whose name silenced rooms, stared down at a waitress who had just dared to defy him. And for the first time in a decade, he didn't know what to say. 3 days had passed since that night at Valentino's, but the echo of those 3 words still followed Dante Moretti like a whisper in the dark. "You don't own me." They replayed in his head between meetings, between threats, between the hollow silences of his mansion overlooking the city. He told himself it was nothing, just another moment of defiance from someone who didn't understand the weight of his world. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face steady, calm, unafraid. City belonged to him. Half of it. At least the other half pretended not to. But everyone knew who pulled the strings. Dante was used to. People bowing to him, not challenging him. Men twice. His size trembled at his orders. But a waitress, a girl who earned, in a week what his shoes cost in a day, had looked him in the eye and made him feel something unfamiliar, something dangerous in the corner of his penthouse office. The lights of downtown spread like stars over black glass. His phone buzzed constantly, reports from his men about shipments, debts, alliances. One message caught his eye. The docs secure, the others handled it. He typed a reply without reading it and tossed the phone aside. He wasn't thinking about the docs or his empire. He was thinking about the sound of her voice. Sarah Mitchell was trying to forget that night she'd worked her next shift, pretending it never happened. Her co-workers whispered about her bravery or stupidity, depending on who you asked. Even Antonio, who'd nearly fainted during the confrontation, couldn't stop staring at her with a mix of awe and fear. "Do you have any idea what you did?" He'd hissed. That was Dante Moretti, the Dante who owns half the police department. Sarah had shrugged. Maybe he needed someone to tell him he was wrong for once. The truth was, she hadn't slept well since that night. Every shadow near her apartment made her tense. Every black car that slowed by the curb made her heart skip. What if he came back? What if he didn't? She didn't know which was worse. On the 4th evening, as she tied her apron in the staff room, Antonio appeared at the door. Pale again. "Mr. Moretti requested you personally tonight." His voice cracked on the last word. Sarah froze. "What do you mean?" "Requested you to serve his table." "No one else." Sarah felt her stomach twist. "Tell him I'm busy." Antonio shook his head. "You don't tell Dante Moretti no." "Not twice." "At exactly 8. The door opened and Dante walked in. The restaurant seemed to fold around him like paper. The chandeliers shimmered brighter. The conversations died faster. Even the music seemed to hold its breath. He wasn't in his usual black tonight. He wore a charcoal suit. No tie. The top button undone, his dark hair slicked, back his expression unreadable. He looked less like a criminal and more like a man who could buy the world and burn it the next minute. His eyes found her instantly across the room. She felt it like a physical pull. Those eyes, dark like storm clouds, locked on her and didn't let go. Sarah turned away, focusing on her tray, her pulse a drumbeat against her ribs. Antonio whispered at her elbow. "Just be polite. Don't look him in the eyes. Don't do anything reckless." She took a breath, straightened her apron, and walked toward the corner booth. Every step echoed too loud. The whole restaurant watched her move like they were witnessing something forbidden. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti." She said, her voice steady, polite, professional. He didn't answer, immediately just studied her like she was a puzzle. No one had solved yet. Then finally he spoke. "Sarah." Her name and his voice felt strange, softer than she expected. "I was hoping you'd be here tonight. I work here 5 nights a week." She replied, careful, as glass. "Yes, he said you did mention that," and awkward. Pause stretched between them. She waited. pen in hand. "Aren't you going to ask if I want my usual?" he said with a faint smirk. She met his gaze. "I assume you'll tell me if you want something different. You assume a lot about me, and you seem determined to prove me wrong again." For the first time his lips curved into something close to a smile, and it startled her. She'd expected arrogance, anger, maybe threats, not amusement. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice dropped low enough that only she could hear. "Do you know who I am now?" She nodded. "I know what people say about you, and does that frighten you?" She hesitated. "No, it concerns me. There's a difference." His eyebrows rose. "Concern, that's a new one. People usually feel terror. I don't believe in living." "Afraid," she said, "if I did, I wouldn't survive half the customers here." He studied her a long time, longer than was appropriate, longer than was safe. Then he said something. "She didn't expect to have dinner with me after your shift." The words landed like a challenge. "I'm working," she said. "And after I'll be gone home. School life outside this restaurant." His eyes didn't leave hers after your shift. He repeated, calm, but firm. "One dinner. One conversation." Every sensible thought in her head screamed. To say no, to walk away, but curiosity won. Maybe recklessness. Maybe fate. "One dinner," she said finally. "Somewhere public." His smile widened. "Anywhere you want." He paused, then added quietly, "And for the record, Sarah, you were right that night. The steak was perfect." As she turned to walk away, she felt the weight of every eye in the restaurant on her again. But this time it wasn't fear that followed her. It was something else. A shift in the air, a spark of something unpredictable, something that neither of them would be able to control for long. The rain had started without warning, the kind that soaked through coats and intentions alike. Outside, Valentino's black cars lined the street, their windows reflecting lightning from the restless sky. Sarah walked quickly, head down, clutching her umbrella. But when she reached the restaurant door, she saw it again. The same sleek black car that had been parked outside for 3 nights. She told herself it was coincidence, but deep down she knew better. Dante Moretti didn't believe in coincidence. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wave, the air thick with perfume and tension. The same corner booth was waiting, candles already lit, wine already poured. Dante was never early or late. He arrived exactly when he intended to. And tonight he was already there. His jacket hung neatly over the booth beside him, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing the faint lines of a tattoo on his wrist. Something sharp, something ancient. A lion maybe, or a crest. He looked up the moment she entered. Their eyes met across the dining room, and her heart skipped the tiniest beat. He didn't smile, not yet, but there was something softer in his gaze, a flicker of something human behind the reputation. Antonio hurried to meet her, his whisper frantic. "He asked for you again, Sarah." "My advice?" "Stay polite and stay quiet." Sarah tied her apron, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward him. Each step, slow, deliberate, controlled. The rest of the restaurant seemed to blur. People whispered but pretended not to watch. Dante's bodyguards stood at the edges, silent shadows with eyes that never stopped scanning. When she reached his table, he was still watching her like she was a secret he'd been trying to remember. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti," she said softly. His voice was low, smooth, dangerous. "Sarah, we said first names. Remember? I work here," she replied. "And I still have rules." His eyes darkened slightly. "You make a habit of challenging men who could destroy you." She tilted her head, "Only the ones who need it." For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then he laughed quietly, the sound deep and unexpected. It wasn't the laugh of a criminal. It was the laugh of a man who hadn't done it in years. "Sit down," he said, motioning to the booth. "I'm working," she said again. "Then, after your shift tonight, 11, the cafe 2 blocks away. Same place you and I both know you'll come." He said it with a certainty that unsettled her. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. The way he looked at her wasn't predatory anymore. It was searching. She nodded slightly. One conversation. Nothing else. He leaned back, satisfied. One conversation. The rest of the night moved in. Slow motion, she took orders. Cleared tables, smiled through small talk, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she turned her head, she found his eyes on her. He barely touched his food, barely spoke to his men. He only watched her. It should have frightened her, but it didn't. It felt like standing on the edge of something vast, something she couldn't name. When the shift ended, the rain had eased into mist. She changed into her blue coat, tucked her hair behind her ears, and stepped out onto the quiet street. The cafe's lights glowed softly in the distance, and for a moment she considered turning back, going home pretending none of this had happened. But something stronger than fear pushed her forward. Inside the cafe, Dante sat in the same corner, booth, a black coffee untouched in front of him. His presence made the ordinary place feel smaller. The young barista behind the counter froze when she saw him and whispered something into her phone. Dante stood when Sarah entered, his movements precise. "Controlled, you came," he said. "I said I would. I don't break promises." She sat opposite him. The hum of the coffee machine, the rain against the glass. It all felt distant for a long moment. They just looked at each other. She saw the exhaustion behind his eyes, the faint tremor in his hand, the weight he carried like armor. He finally spoke. "You think I'm a monster, don't you?" She hesitated. "I think you've forgotten what being human feels like." His jaw tightened, and then he laughed again, softer, this time. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and have every person either fear you or want something from you?" She didn't answer because she could see it now. The loneliness behind the legend. The man, trapped inside his own power. His phone buzzed once, twice. He ignored it the third time. He sighed, looked at the screen and cursed softly. "Trouble at the docks," he muttered. Then looked at her and his voice changed. "Don't wait up for me. That's not something I planned on doing." Good. He stood, sliding money onto the table, enough to pay for the next week's rent. "Keep the change. I don't need your charity. Call it payment for your honesty." He turned to leave, then paused, his hand on the door. "Those 3 words you said that night," he said quietly. "They didn't make me angry. They made me remember what it's like to be told no." He looked back at her over his shoulder, and for the first time his expression wasn't hard. It was alive. Then he was gone into the wet streets, into the storm, leaving her staring at the empty booth, wondering if she'd just stepped into something beautiful or something deadly. The night air was heavy with rain, and Secret's thunder rolled across the city as lightning flashed over the harbor. Dante Moretti stood beneath a metal awning, staring out at the black water. His coat dripping, the men around him spoke in low voices about shipments, betrayals, and names that would soon disappear from records. Dante barely listened. His mind was still at the cafe. The memory of Sarah's voice cutting through the noise of his world like a blade. She had looked at him like she could see every scar he tried to hide and still hadn't flinched. Marcus, his second in command, stepped forward. "Boss, the thief is handled." Dante turned slowly, his eyes cold. "Handled how exactly?" Marcus hesitated. "He won't be stealing again." Dante nodded, but there was no satisfaction in it. The old Dante would have smiled at that. The old Dante would have poured a drink and called it justice. But now, as the rain poured harder, he felt only exhaustion. He got into his car without another word. The city blurred past in streaks of wet light. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger for years. He had lived by rules of fear and control. Now all of it felt hollow. When he closed his eyes, he saw her face instead of blood. He heard her voice instead of silence. "You don't own." Miss Sarah couldn't sleep that night, she kept replaying their conversation over and over, the loneliness in his voice, the sadness behind the arrogance, the way he had looked at her before walking out into the storm. She knew she should stay away. Every story about men like him ended in tragedy. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her believe he was more than the monster people whispered about. The next morning she arrived at Valentino's. Early, the kitchen smelled of coffee and baked bread. Antonio gave her a nervous glance. "You heard the news? Another warehouse hit last night. Someone's pushing the Moretti family hard." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she tied her apron. "So that's where he went." Antonio frowned. "You'd better hope he's not blaming you for the distraction." But Dante wasn't blaming her. He was thinking of her again 3 days later, when the world refused to calm down. A black car stopped in front of the restaurant she was carrying trays. When the door opened and he stepped out, wearing a dark gray coat, his hair slick from rain, the moment he entered the room, every sound died. The waiters froze. The guests stopped talking. The air changed. He walked straight toward her. Ignoring everyone else, the smell of expensive cologne, mixed with the faint scent of gunpowder, she tried to keep her voice steady. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti." He looked down at her and said quietly, "We need to talk outside now." The words sent a ripple through the room. Sarah followed him through the doors, into the alley behind the restaurant, where the rain had just begun to fall again. He turned his back to her for a long moment, silent, when he finally spoke. His voice was low. "Someone tried to use you last night." "What are you talking about?" she asked, confused. "One of my men was approached by a rival family. They offered money for information about me. They wanted to know if I had a weakness, and apparently they think it's you." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Dante turned to her, and for the first time she saw fear. Not for himself, but for her. "They think you matter to me, Sarah. They're not wrong, but that makes you a target." The rain fell harder, pooling at their feet. She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "Why tell me this? Because I need you to be careful. Stay away from me for a while. If they think I don't care, they'll lose interest. That's your plan. Pretend I don't exist," she asked, her eyes bright with anger. "That's not protection. That's running away." Dante's hands clenched at his sides. "I can't lose you before I even understand what this is." His voice cracked slightly. "I've spent my life turning people into enemies. I don't know how to protect someone I care about." The confession hung in the rain between them. Sarah stepped closer, close enough to see the water dripping from his hair. Her hand rose before she could stop herself, brushing his cheek lightly. "You don't have to protect me like a possession," she said softly. "Then how?" Dante asked, desperate. She looked into his eyes like an anchor. "Hold me as an equal." For a heartbeat, the world stopped, the rain, the sirens, the city, everything faded. He caught her hand in his grip firm but gentle, the first real warmth he had felt in years. "I can't promise you safety," he whispered. "I can only promise you truth." "Then start there," she said. The sound of tires screeching cut through the moment. Headlights flashed at the end of the alley, a black sedan speeding toward them. Dante shoved her against the wall, just as bullets tore through the rain. Glass shattered. Alarms screamed. His men appeared out of nowhere. Returning fire, chaos exploding around them. When the shots stopped, Dante turned back to her, his face pale but determined. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Trembling, he exhaled relief, then whispered, "This is what my world looks like, Sarah, and if you stay with me, it only gets darker." She met his gaze, steady through the storm. "Maybe, but darkness doesn't scare me anymore." Dante stared at her, drenched and defiant, and realized something terrifying. She wasn't just the waitress who stood up to him. She was the one who might finally bring him to his knees. The city hadn't slept since the gunfire that echoed behind Valentino's streets whispered the name Dante Moretti, like a curse and a Legend at once. The papers called it a business dispute, but everyone knew better. It was war, and wars in this city never stayed quiet for long. 3 nights after the attack, Sarah sat in her small apartment staring at the faint crack in her window, where a bullet had passed too close. She hadn't told the police. She didn't need to. The men in dark suits outside her building made sure she was safe, or maybe made sure she couldn't run. She didn't know which anymore. She hadn't seen Dante. Since that night, he had vanished like smoke one minute, holding her trembling hands in the alley the next, giving orders to his men to move her home safely before disappearing into the chaos. She tried not to think about him, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face half lit by lightning, his expression torn between fury and fear. Valentino's everyone acted like nothing had happened. The corner booth stayed empty. The waiters avoided looking at it as if saying his name might summon danger again. Antonio's hands shook whenever the door opened. The customers whispered, but kept eating, pretending normalcy was safety. Then on the 4th night, as the clock struck 8, Dante returned. He entered alone. No bodyguards, no entourage, no warning. His dark coat still dripping from the rain. His presence froze the room like frost. Sarah was carrying a tray of glasses when she saw him. She almost dropped it. He walked straight to the bar and ordered something no one expected: coffee. Black, no wine, no whiskey, just quiet. The head waiter glanced at Sarah and whispered, "He asked for you again." She hesitated. Every instinct said stay away, but something stronger made her move. She approached slowly, her footsteps echoing on marble. His eyes lifted when she stopped in front of him. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "You should be hiding." He looked tired. Shadows under his eyes deeper than she remembered. "Hiding is for men who have something left to lose," he said flatly. "What about you?" she asked, almost whispering. He looked at her like her question hurt more than bullets. "I'm not sure anymore." She wanted to hate him for pulling her into his dangerous world. But instead she felt something else. Pity, no. It was deeper than that connection. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They hit one of my warehouses again. 3 men dead. They won't stop until I end this." "And how do you plan to end it?" she asked. Hoping he wouldn't answer the way she feared, the corner of his mouth lifted, not with humor, but something cold, by showing them mercy isn't weakness. His words confused her and intrigued her. At the same time, he stood signaling for her to follow. She didn't know why she did. Maybe because she already knew. She couldn't pretend indifference anymore. He led her outside to his car, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. He opened the door for her, a gesture that felt wrong coming from a man like him. But his voice softened. "Please, I want you to see who I really am." The car wound through silent streets until they reached the docks. Rows of warehouses loomed like sleeping beasts, one still smoldering smoke curling into the sky. Dante stepped out into the damp air, the scent of salt and fire mixing. In the night, he turned to her. "This is what my empire looks like," he said quietly. Ashes and silence. Sarah stepped closer. Not afraid anymore. "What do you see when you look at it?" he asked. She looked at him instead. A man who wants to stop burning the world down, but doesn't know how his eyes met hers. And for a moment, the storm inside him broke. "I used to think control was everything," he said. "I built this city out of fear. I thought if people feared me, no one could hurt me. But then you looked me in the eye and took that power from me." She shook her head. "I didn't take anything from you, Dante. You gave it up the moment you cared." He stared at her like she had spoken a secret. He hadn't realized he kept the wind howled off the sea, but neither moved his hand. Rose hesitating before brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "You should hate me for what I've dragged you into." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I should, but I don't." For the first time, his hand trembled. The mask of the ruthless boss cracked, showing something raw underneath you. Think I can change, Sarah? She met his gaze steady. I think you already are. Behind them. Headlights flashed. His men approached tense, armed, ready for violence. Marcus, his lieutenant whispered. The word Boss Russo's crew is moving tonight. We can take them out before dawn. Dante didn't look away from her. His jaw tightened. No more. Blood. Tell them to stand down. Marcus stared, stunned, but obeyed. Walking away into the night, Sarah felt her heart twist. You just spared them, she said quietly. He nodded. I did, because you were watching. In that moment, Sarah realized the truth. He wasn't changing for power or peace. He was changing because of her. And maybe that was the most dangerous transformation. Of all, she didn't know if it would save them or destroy them. But as thunder rolled across the harbor, she knew one thing for certain. The story between them was far from over. The morning after the docks incident, the city woke up different. The streets were quieter. The news anchor spoke carefully, as if afraid to say the wrong name. And behind every window, people whispered that Dante Moretti had changed. Some said he had gone soft. Others said he was planning something darker. No one knew the truth, because no one knew the woman who had started it all. Sarah opened her apartment door and found an envelope on the floor. No stamp, no handwriting. Only her name inside was a single photo. It showed her walking home the night before her shift. Jacket pulled tight against the wind. Across the back in red ink, someone had written 3 words, "He can't save you." Her heart pounded so hard she almost dropped the picture. She knew who sent it. This wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration. She didn't think she was afraid anymore, but her hands trembled anyway. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number Dante had given her after the alley attack. A number she had sworn not to use unless it was life or death. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and rough. "Where are you?" She told him about the photo, about the writing, about the feeling that someone was watching from the street below. "Stay inside." He ordered, his tone sharp. "I'm coming now, Dante, don't." She said quickly, "I can't keep hiding. You said you didn't want to own me. Then let me choose how I deal with this." For a long moment. Silence filled the line. Then he said softly, "I don't own you, but I protect what I care about." 10 minutes later, black cars pulled up outside the building. Dante stepped out, surrounded by his men, his eyes scanning every shadow. When he saw her at the top of the stairs, something in his face softened, but he didn't smile. He walked straight to her and took the photo from her, his jaw tightened. "Russo," he muttered. "I told him to stand down." She studied his expression. "This isn't about business anymore, is it?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "It never was. Not after you." They spent the rest of the day inside the apartment. Blinds drawn, the hum of rain against the window filling the silence. She sat on the couch. He stood by the window, one hand on his gun, the other pressed against his temple as if trying to hold back the war building in his head. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "You can't fight your way out of this. Not forever." His laugh was hollow. "It's all I've ever done." She stood, walked to him and said, "Then maybe it's time you learned something new." He looked at her like he didn't understand, and maybe he didn't. She reached out, took his hand, and placed it over her heart. "Feel that that's not fear, Dante. That's trust. It's what you've been chasing your whole life." For a moment, his breath caught. Then the sound of glass shattering cut through the room. A bullet cracked through the window, embedding itself in the wall, inches from where she had stood moments ago. Dante grabbed her, pulling her down behind the couch. His men shouted outside. Tires screeched, the sound of another car speeding away. Dante cursed under his breath. He pulled her close, his heartbeat hammering against her back. She was shaking but not crying when the noise faded. He stood and barked orders to his men. "Find who did this." "Alive." She rose slowly, her voice trembling. "Dante, this isn't just about power anymore. This is revenge. He turned to her, eyes dark. This is protection. They're coming after you because of me. Because I tried to change the rules. She stepped closer. Then make new ones. That night he called a meeting in one of his hidden properties, a warehouse on the edge of the city. His closest men gathered, their faces tense when he entered. They stood, but he waved them down tonight. The rules change, he said flatly. No more fear. No more wars. For territory, anyone who can't live by that walks now. Murmurs filled the room. Some confused, some angry. Marcus. His second stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Boss, this isn't who we are. Dante met his gaze. It's who we're becoming after the meeting. He walked alone to the balcony overlooking the river. The city lights reflected in the water like shards of gold. Sarah joined him, silent for a long time before she spoke. You just risked everything for peace. He glanced at her. Not everything. I still have you. She smiled faintly. You might lose everything because of me. He shook his head. No, because of you. I remembered what it's like to have something worth losing before she could answer his phone. Buzzed. He looked down at the screen and his face changed. The color drained from his skin. What is it? She asked. He handed her the phone. A message glowed across the screen. You can change your rules, but you can't change fate. The next target is her. Sarah felt the world tilt around her as she read the words. In that moment, she knew that where Dante tried to stop had already begun again, only this time. It wasn't about territory or power. It was about survival and love, and how much blood a man was willing to spill to protect the woman who had taught him how to live. Night fell like a bruise over the city. The streets glowed with rain and warning lights, and somewhere beyond the noise, a war was breathing again. Sarah sat by the window of Dante's safe house, staring at the skyline, the reflection of fire trucks flashing in the distance. Dante's phone kept buzzing, but he ignored it, his eyes fixed on her, as if the world outside no longer mattered. He had sent half his men to hunt down whoever wrote that message. The other half guarded the house. But even he knew that safety was an illusion in his world. Every shadow held a memory, every silence, a gun waiting to be drawn. Sarah finally spoke. You can't keep me locked here forever. He turned from the window, his jaw tight. I can keep you alive. She shook her head. You're mistaking control for love again. His eyes softened, but only slightly. You think I don't know the difference. I see it every time I look at you. You're the only thing I can't command. A knock echoed through the hall. Sharp and sudden, one of his guards entered. Breathless. Boss, we found something. Dante's expression hardened. Show me. He followed the man into the office, leaving Sarah alone. The house felt too quiet. Too still, the kind of quiet that comes before disasters. He stood pacing the floor, then noticed the envelope on the side table. Her name scrawled in hurried ink. The guard must have dropped it. It wasn't Dante's handwriting. Curiosity overrode fear. She opened it. Inside were photos, not of her this time, but of Dante with her smiling together outside the cafe. Outside Valentino's. A voice message chip fell from the envelope. She stared at it, trembling. She found an old recorder on the desk, slid it in and pressed. Play. A deep voice filled the room. Calm. Deliberate. You can't save him, Miss Mitchell. The blood on his hands will drown you both. You have one night to walk away, or tomorrow you'll both be ghosts. Her chest tightened. The voice was familiar, though she couldn't place it. She grabbed the photos and stormed toward the office. But before she could reach the door, it burst open. Dante's men shouting, "Boss, move!" Now shots rang out. Glass-shattered bullets tore through the hall. Sarah screamed as Dante pulled her down, his body covering hers. Gunfire erupted back and forth, echoing like thunder. When the noise finally stopped, smoke filled the air. Dante helped her to her feet, his arm bleeding slightly, but his voice steady. Are you hurt? She shook her head, just terrified. Good means you're still human, he said with a faint smile. They moved quickly through a hidden passage behind the bookshelf. The concrete corridor was cold and narrow. The only light came from flickering bulbs above. Where are we going? She asked to the only place they won't. Expect me to run my mother's old house on the edge of the river. No one knows it exists except me. And now you. Outside, the rain had turned into mist. Their car waited, headlights dimmed. Dante opened the door for her. She hesitated before stepping. In Dante, if this doesn't stop, it will destroy you. He slid behind the wheel. It already has. They drove in silence through back roads until the city disappeared behind them. The safe house sat near the water. A crumbling mansion swallowed by ivy inside, dust-covered old portraits and furniture wrapped in sheets. He lit a lantern and looked at her. This is where I grew up before everything went wrong. Before I became him, for the first time Sarah saw a glimpse of the boy behind the monster she touched. One of the photos on the mantel. A young Dante smiling beside a woman with kind eyes. Is that her? Your mother? He nodded. She used to say darkness. Only wins if you let it. She was wrong, he whispered. Because sometimes it wins anyway, before she could. Answer the sound of crunching gravel outside froze them both. Dante grabbed his gun, pulling her behind him. Stay here, he whispered, moving toward the door through the window. She saw figures moving through the fog shadows carrying rifles. Dante fired. Once, twice, the night exploded into chaos. Sarah crouched low, heart racing. She grabbed the lantern and smashed it to the floor. Flames licking across the wood. She could hear Dante shouting orders, his men returning fire. The old house shaking from the noise. She covered her ears and prayed. The smoke grew thick, choking the air. Then the gunfire stopped. Dante appeared through the haze, blood on his shirt. But alive. We have to move now. He pulled her through the back door toward the river. The house. Behind them, engulfed in flames, the reflection of fire on water turning the night into gold. As they reached the boat hidden beneath the dock, Dante paused, watching the mansion burn. Everything I ever was. He said, it's gone. Sarah looked at him. Her, voice trembling. Maybe that's what needed to happen. He turned to her, his eyes glinting through the firelight. I'm done running tomorrow. I end this war. She touched his face softly. You can't end violence with violence. He met her gaze steady. I'm not ending it with violence. I'm ending it with truth. And in that moment under the burning sky, Sarah realized something terrifying and beautiful. Dante Moretti wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was trying to redeem his soul, even if it killed him. Dawn crept over the river like smoke. The flames from the old mansion still hissed in the distance, as Dante and Sarah drifted downstream. In silence, the small boat rocked with the current, the air thick with ash and the scent of burned memories. Dante's eyes were locked on the horizon, his jaw set, his shirt stained with dried blood. Sarah sat beside him, holding her knees close, afraid to speak, afraid to break the fragile stillness. When they reached the city's edge, Dante docked the boat near an abandoned pier. His men were waiting, grim faces half hidden by fog. Marcus stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The Russo family made their move. He said flatly, "They want a meeting tonight. He says it's to end things." Dante wiped his hands on his coat. End things or end. Sarah could feel the tension building again, the kind that hummed before storms. She touched his arm. "Don't go. It's a trap." Dante looked down at her, his eyes soft for the first time since the fire, maybe, but this time I'm not bringing a gun. The men stared at him, stunned. "Boss, you can't walk into that alone." He ignored them, his gaze never leaving Sarah. "If I don't end this now, it'll never stop. It's not about me anymore. It's about the kind of man I choose to be." He left her under guard in a hotel near the waterfront, her protests drowned by his quiet promise. "I'll come back to you." She stood at the window, watching his car disappear into the morning fog. Her reflection, in the glass, looked foreign. A woman caught between fear and faith. She whispered to herself, "You better keep that promise." Night fell like a blade over the city. The meeting was set in an old cathedral, closed to the public years ago. Candles flickered against cracked marble walls and broken stained glass, threw splinters of color across the floor. Dante walked down the aisle alone, his footsteps echoing through the hollow space. Russo waited near the altar, surrounded by armed men, his grin sharp as a knife. "I have to admit, I didn't think you'd come without an army," Dante said quietly. "I brought something better." Russo laughed and spread his arms. "What's that, Moretti?" "Mercy," Dante said, and the word hung in the air like a dare. For a long moment. Neither moved. Then Russo's smile faded. "You think words fix the blood between us? We can't be reborn, Dante." "You and I were made in the dark," maybe he said. "But I'm tired of pretending it's the only place we belong." Before Russo could reply, the church doors burst open. Federal agents stormed in their guns. Drawn, Dante didn't flinch. He had made the call. Hours before, hands raised. He turned toward Russo. "This is how it ends. Not with bullets, but with truth. You built your empire. On fear now, it crumbles under it." Russo screamed betrayal as agents dragged him down. Dante watched without a word. The sound of sirens filled the night. He didn't fight. He didn't run. He just stood there, as if the weight of every sin he'd ever committed was finally too heavy to carry. At the hotel, Sarah's phone buzzed an unknown number. She answered, and a voice said softly, "Miss Mitchell, Mr. Moretti asked us to bring you to him." She was led to a car escorted through police barricades and flashing lights when she saw him standing on the church steps, surrounded by officers but uncuffed. She almost couldn't breathe. He walked to her slowly, rain beginning to fall again, soft and relentless, his face calm, almost peaceful. She ran to him, her voice breaking. "What did you do?" He reached for her hand. "I ended it the right way. I gave them everything they needed to tear it all down, the trafficking. The money, the men behind me. It's over." She stared at him, tears mixing with rain. "They'll come for you next. You know that?" He smiled faintly, maybe, but for once they'll be coming for the right man. She shook her head, pressing her hand against his chest. "No. This isn't how it ends." His voice lowered. "Yes, it is. It ends when we stop pretending that love can't exist in a world like mine." He leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't desperate or wild. It was quiet, like a confession, like forgiveness in its purest form. When he pulled away, he whispered 3 words softer than she'd ever heard before. "You saved me." The agents led him away, but he didn't look back. Sarah stood under the rain watching as the sirens faded into the night, the cathedral behind her glowing with the light of dawn breaking through the broken glass weeks later. Newspapers called it the collapse of an empire. Billions in assets seized, dozens arrested, and one name whispered again and again. Not as a curse, but as a legend. Dante Moretti. The man who traded power for peace. Sarah visited him months later in a secluded facility. Not a prison, but a place built for witnesses. He looked thinner, quieter, but alive when he saw her. He smiled that same calm smile. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. She took his hand. "You said you'd come back, and you did. Maybe not the way I wanted, but you kept your promise." He looked at her with eyes that no longer hid behind darkness and whispered, "I didn't save the city, Sarah. You did. You made me believe a monster could be human again." Outside the window, the river shimmered under the sun, the same river that had carried them away from the fire months ago. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of church bells rang, not mourning death, but celebrating rebirth. 6 months had passed since the night the empire fell, and the city began to breathe again. But peace in Dante Moretti's world was never simple. It came with ghosts that refused to fade. Sarah had moved into a small apartment overlooking the water. She worked at a community clinic where children's laughter replaced the sound of sirens. Yet some nights when the wind shifted, she could still hear echoes of gunfire carried over the river. She hadn't seen Dante since that last visit, the one where he told her she had saved him. The feds had moved him again for security reasons. She wrote letters, sometimes never sure if they reached him. Then one morning, a thick envelope appeared at her door. No return address, just her name written. In bold, confident handwriting, her heart stuttered as she opened it. Inside was a single letter written in his voice. She could almost hear it as she read Sarah. I don't know where to start, so I'll start with truth. I am not free, but I am alive. The world I built is gone. And for the first time, I am not afraid of that. What you gave me was more than forgiveness. You gave me a reason to try again if you ever wonder whether I think of you. The answer is always. There was no signature, just a small folded photograph of them standing by the river, his hand over hers, the sun setting behind them. Tears filled her eyes as she held it close. That same afternoon, the clinic phone rang. A man's voice, calm but urgent. Miss Mitchell, you need to come quickly. There's been an incident. She froze. What kind of incident? The voice hesitated. It's about Mr. Moretti. Her heart dropped. She rushed out into the storm, her taxi cutting through sheets of rain. The city seemed to tilt and blur around her. When she reached the federal building, the agent at the front desk recognized her immediately. This way. Miss Mitchell. She followed him through long corridors until they stopped at a quiet room. With one glass wall behind it, sat Dante alive. But bruised, his hands clasped together, his expression unreadable. She burst through the door before anyone could stop her. What happened? He looked up, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. They tried to move me again. He said, low voice, rough. Someone ambushed the convoy. I lost 2 men. They wanted me dead. Sarah, the past isn't done with me. She moved closer, her voice trembling. You need to disappear again. Leave the country, start over. His laugh was bitter. I've been running all my life. I won't anymore. She placed her hands on his face. You promised me peace. He nodded, and for the first time in months, she saw something in his eyes. Not despair, but determination. Maybe peace needs to be fought for two nights later, the news exploded. Across every channel, former crime boss Dante Moretti cleared of all charges. After testifying against 5 international syndicates, his cooperation had brought down an empire larger than anyone imagined. Sarah watched the broadcast in disbelief. Her phone buzzed with a message. No number. Just 4 words, meet me at Valentino's. The restaurant had been closed for months, its once golden lights now dull and forgotten. She entered cautiously. The chandeliers hung dusty, the tables covered in sheets, and at the far end of the room the corner booth waited, the same place where it all began. Dante stood there in a dark suit, his hair longer, his eyes softer. He smiled when he saw her. You're free, she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. Free enough, he said, stepping closer. Free enough to start over. If you'll have me. She shook her head, laughing through tears. I don't know if we can go back. He reached for her hand. Who said anything about going back? He led her to the center of the room where sunlight broke through the cracked window, bathing the dust in gold. I bought this place, he said softly. I'm turning it into a foundation for kids from the streets, scholarships, food shelters, everything I should have built years. Her voice broke. That's what redemption looks like, Dante. He smiled. Maybe it's just love finally given a purpose. He dropped to one knee, not in the arrogance of power, but in humility. his hand shaking slightly as he opened a small box inside, was a simple silver ring, the kind that didn't speak of wealth, but of promise. "I don't want to own you, Sarah. I just want to walk beside you. No guards, no lies, no fears." He covered her mouth, tears falling freely. People outside stopped to stare. Through the glass, as the man once feared by all whispered the only words that truly mattered, "Will you marry me?" For a moment she couldn't speak. She saw every version of him at once, the ruthless king, the broken man, the one who found light in the darkness. Finally she said yes, not because he had changed, but because they both had. The city that once trembled at his name now whispered it differently, not as a warning, but as a story of rebirth. Dante and Sarah walked out of Valentino's hand. In hand, the doors closing behind them as sunlight spilled across the street. The ghosts were gone. The war was over, and for the first time in his life, Dante Moretti didn't look like a man escaping the past. He looked like a man finally walking into the future. 1 year later, the city had changed. Its skyline glowed with new light. The noise of fear replaced by laughter in places that used to whisper Dante Moretti's name. Sarah stood outside the renovated Valentino's, now transformed into a community. Center children ran past her carrying books, and food volunteers bustled inside where chandeliers once hung. The sign above the door read, "The Moretti Foundation for Second Chances." She smiled softly, remembering what this place used to be, a cage, made of gold. Now it was something alive, something free. Dante was inside, speaking with a group of reporters. Calm, steady his voice. No longer the voice of command, but of purpose. Every word spoke of rebuilding, of giving back, of healing from the darkness that nearly consumed them both. When he finished, he stepped outside and found her waiting. His suit was simple, his tie loose, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them, they said. "This city would never change," he said quietly. She smiled. Maybe it just needed someone stubborn enough to try. He laughed low and genuine, the sound still strange and beautiful to her. They walked together down the busy street, the smell of rain and coffee mixing in the air. The world moved around them. But for the first time, they didn't feel watched. They felt part of it, normal, alive. He reached for her hand, the silver ring catching the sunlight. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. He shook his head. "I didn't even think I'd live long enough to imagine it." They turned a corner, and a car screeched to a stop nearby. Instinct made Dante move in front of her, hand on his chest, his old habits rising before he realized it was only a cab driver yelling at a cyclist. Sarah touched his arm gently, still learning to let go. He whispered. She smiled always. That evening they returned to the foundation for the opening ceremony. The building was full, the crowd buzzing with curiosity and hope. Children from the poorest neighborhoods sat beside politicians and police officers. People who once feared his name now applauded his redemption. Sarah stood at the edge of the stage as Dante took the microphone, his voice carrying through the hall. "I used to believe power meant control. I used to think respect was earned through fear. But fear doesn't build it. Breaks, and control doesn't heal it. Destroys what saved me. Wasn't mercy. It was courage. The courage of one woman who refused to bow, even when I tried to make her." He looked toward Sarah. Their eyes meeting across the room, the crowd turned to see her. She felt her throat tighten. He continued. "She reminded me that love without freedom isn't love at all, and that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength there is. I stand here not as a man who conquered anything, but as one who was forgiven." Applause rose like thunder. Sarah wiped her tears, trying to hide her smile afterward as the lights dimmed. He found her standing alone near the balcony. The city stretched before them, glowing gold against the night sky. He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Remember when we met?" he whispered. "I yelled about a steak and you ruined my entire empire." She laughed softly. Maybe it needed ruining. He rested his head against hers. Maybe it did. She turned to face him, eyes glimmering in the soft light. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and said softly, "You don't own me." She smiled, finishing the sentence. "No. We own our choices now." He kissed her slow and deep, the world outside fading. For a moment, everything quiet. The ghosts of the past, finally at peace. Later that night, as they locked the doors of the foundation and walked into the street, hand in hand, thunder rumbled in the distance. Not of danger, but of rain. The same rain that once witnessed their war, now falling gently over their peace. People still whispered the name Dante Moretti, but now it meant something different. It meant redemption. It meant rebirth. It meant that even the darkest heart could learn to love again. As they disappeared down the rain-soaked street, Sarah whispered into the night, "This time we write our own ending." And Dante Moretti smiled because for the first time in his life, the ending wasn't written.